I think if you're going to do a startup, like I think one of the worst mentalities to have is what I often call like a min-max mentality, in which like everything has to be the most optimal choice. Startups by default is a wildly unoptimal choice and like a life career decision. The reality of it is like, no, it's like really just kind of a journey and exploration. It's a personal decision at the end of the day. I have seen this a lot, in which I think a lot of founders have a tendency to self-delude into believing like, oh, as long as they just like keep on doing it, it'll work out. But while they think that, they also aren't actively trying to prove that it's going to fail. Like, they're not really trying to seek out truth. And I think a lot of times for early stage startups, the stress and this pressure of needing to succeed almost like is it's like self-defeating. Like it will actually destroy you just because you have so much pressure on yourself.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the product market fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Rick, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Dude, so over the last 7 years or so, you've grown Persona to like a multi-billion-dollar valuation. You raised over $400 million, over $100 million in ARR. So it's become a huge success and on its way even bigger. But we'll talk today really about kind of the early days, right? Like how and why you started Persona in the first place and how you got things off the ground. So anyways, maybe take me back like to your background before 2018, like what were you doing? And then we can kind of dive into how Persona came to be.
Yeah, for sure. So prior to all of this, I was an engineer at Square for about 5 years. My co-founder and I are both engineers. So my co-founder is over at Dropbox, working a lot on the data infrastructure side of things. I've been at Square working on fraud, risk, identity. At that time, what we'd really seen was, I would almost say, a disconnect between what, we needed as an entity versus what a lot of the market was kind of offering and what they would kind of say from an identity solutioning perspective of what would solve our problems. So, at that time, working on a lot of these problems, you'd talk with various vendors. A lot of these vendors would promise you some sort of silver bullet saying like, this is the, one silver bullet to solve all your identity problems. Fraud would disappear, very, very extreme claims. But the reality for us as a business and how we had to build things was we had to incorporate all these various signals in, make them kind of tailor it such that it really makes sense for exactly our use case. And we have to do this for all these different types of products within Square as well. So my team there, a lot of our work at that time was building out identity solutions that would not only for a single product, but Square was emerging as this entire conglomerate for all sorts of different kinds of services, anywhere from, what back then was best known for, the Square white card reader, into Cash App, into business banking, into, lending and more. So with us on those ends, that's kind of where we saw an opportunity to build an identity platform that could really service any type of use case out there. So Charles, co-founder, was my roommate at that time. He'd always had more of an entrepreneurial spirit than I did, but he was pushing a lot on hey, we should do something together, right? We live together right now. He's one of my best friends. And I work a lot on the identity side of things. So that kind of, that combination of ideas and an entrepreneurial desire was kind of what birthed Persona. And this was back in 2018.
What stage was Square at when you joined?
So I joined, I can barely remember. Maybe, actually, funnily enough, probably to a similar size at exactly what Persona is at now. So I think it was about 300 something people, either Series C or Series D. I can't exactly recall.
And you come right out of college? Like that was your first job, or?
First job right out of college. You've done a couple of internships here and there, but yeah, never.
And walk me through, for people like me who are not necessarily identity or fraud experts, maybe just make it tangible. You think about Square, obviously you're dealing with these, with payments and all that stuff. There's going to be those issues, but what is under that? When you say identity, what is the main problem and how does it surface up?
The common way, especially for a technologist, when they speak of identity, is usually they think of it from the perspective of access. So that would be something like, logging in with your email, things like that, right? And that's one perspective of identity, but that's not the perspective of identity that Persona really deals with. When we talk about identity, we think of it much more actually from the intuitive sense, from a physical perspective. When I ask you, what's your identity? You don't tell me, oh, it's your email. You'll say it's Pablo, right? If you ask me, I'll say it's Rick. We're looking for the identity that is kind of the publicly recognized, the government issued identity, the physical identity of the person. Another way I oftentimes talk about it is, I may have many Reddit accounts. I have many user email addresses, right? I have all sorts of digital identities. I only have one physical identity, right? At least within the current limitations of technology. Maybe AI will change that. Who knows, right? But today I only have one physical identity. And that physical identity is the one that persona fundamentally helps companies resolve. We're the ones who are trying to help businesses be able to figure out who is it behind the screen, who's the physical person that actually is representing this overall interaction. And that entire pursuit, is challenging primarily because it's largely probabilistic. You hear all the time about digital identity theft. You hear about people impersonating others these days. There's deep fakes, all of that. And the reality of how you have to solve that problem is actually that there's not a silver bullet. There's not a single solution. There's not a magical way to just be able to say with absolute certainty, every single thing out there has a bypass. In many ways, actually, the problem becomes more of a security problem than it is just a strict technology problem. So a lot of our work can be anywhere from anti-fraud to compliance, from trust and safety, to ML and AI, trying to triangulate with sufficient probability for the use case a customer faces that this person really is who they say they are, and making sure that's hopefully as seamless as possible for us as the end user. We can make sure that the data is treated with the absolute sensitivity. These days, you hear all the time about businesses having data breaches and otherwise. Our goal is to make sure that the next time you have to be yourself online, it's as easy as putting in your credit card information, in which you just don't think about it. You don't really, when you're making a purchase on Amazon these days, when you make a purchase on any sort of Shopify store, we don't worry anymore that they're going to leak our credit card information, that this purchase is going to be, still all of that. It feels like a very safe transaction. I think today, identity doesn't feel that way. When you put in your personal information, you feel as if your data, might get stolen, that someone might take it and impersonate you and ruin your credit score, or God knows what kind of sort of interactions. Our goal is to restore and make a digital identity infrastructure that feels safe, that's seamless, that the next time you do anything here, it doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like a minor inconvenience, the same way as making a purchase online.
And I mean, this is probably another stupid question, but from a layman's perspective, you say there's no silver bullet, but on mobile and Face ID as an example, is that a silver bullet for the mobile use cases, or is there some issues even to that, or is that just a subset of kind of identity the way you're talking about it?
So it's a subset of it. And the way I often describe that is that Face ID may be able to tell you that it's the same person. But again, our challenge is not about, is it the same person? The fundamental question we have is, who are you within some sort of registry? Who are you as recognized by the government, right? So even though I could Face ID into my phone, it doesn't know. And, I can make it so that my name right now is, any sort of name out there, right? Tim Smith, God knows what, right? Any name. And that isn't, sure. For my own self-attested identity, some people may appreciate it, right? People have monikers, people have usernames, all sorts of things. But for a lot of the businesses and the use cases we fundamentally work with and support, the thing they're most interested in is, who are you as recognized by somebody else?
So when, you're working in fraud and identity at Square, your co-founder comes to you, says you got to do something here. We're very high level, right? Identity fraud, these are big ideas, but what's the thing that you see that others don't, or what's the wedge that you start with?
So we had a vision from early on, and that actually never changed. And we worked backwards from the vision. We didn't really start it from and I think this is one of the aspects of Persona's founding story that is a little bit maybe strange. But one thing I oftentimes tell folks is literally from day one, we've never really pivoted. We've never our long-term vision was almost crystallized even before our MVP. And that long-term vision is today, and it will sound somewhat obvious, but it's today, when you verify yourself in one place, right? You've probably put in your, personal information on various sites. You've probably had to submit a government ID, sometimes perform a biometric check. There's, for all sorts of application science these days, you've probably done that in some way, shape, or form. However, the reality of today's status quo is that you have to do that over and over again. And every single company does this in isolation. And the way we oftentimes talk about this is that if you're a fraudster who created a fake identity at one store, most of the time what they would do is they'll ban you and say no more. You can just go right next door and use it again. And there's no sort of defense. And then for us as good actors, as folks who have genuine intent, we're forced to go through the exact same kind of process. And what's even worse is that even from the start of Persona, over the past 5 years, the amount of friction, the amount of effort to do that has not decreased, it's actually only increased. We're watching the complication of how to be ourselves online get progressively worse year by year. So the vision of Persona was, the long term cannot be that every single business is establishing this individually. The long term has to be that there's a way in which we can own our personal information, make it easier with higher credibility, and be able to operate in a network-based approach in which when you verify one place, it should be easier at the next place and even easier at the subsequent. And there should be some sort of lines there. So once we had that as like this long-term vision that identity can no longer be siloed, but there should be some sort of like global backbone and ideally consumer controlled data with, and also for businesses, making sure that their data is also managed securely. We work back for some there of like, well, how do we make such a vision come to reality? And the first thing that we had stumbled on is we have to at least build the universal processor. Oftentimes there are a lot of businesses, I've seen the space for quite some time. There are a lot of businesses who would issue kind of new credentials. They'd be like, hey, here's this new identity thing. If everyone opts into it, then, I guess the infrastructure could be better. But that's really a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah, because that was my first, everybody kind of becomes like a persona verified, and then like persona becomes like the thing with everybody else. Like that was where my mind originally went when you're talking about this.
It's the common one, right? But the challenge there is twofold. One of which is as end users, we don't opt into anything unless, there's intent. The second is that different types of use cases have different problems. For example, if I was ordering alcohol and need to verify that I'm over 21, that could be a very seamless kind of process. But on the flip side, if you're applying for a loan for over $1 million, you can't use the same identity that you just proven with for alcohol. So like it would just be the level of diligence required for these two use cases is fundamentally different. So our perspective was then what you really need first and foremost is a processor. You need to make it such that all these companies, there's an interoperable kind of processor on the other side for businesses in which every business, another way to put it is that every business day accepts credit cards, right? Whether swipe or tap, there's a protocol effectively now in which every business can kind of accept. We have to first build effectively that card processor. We have to first build the backbone that all companies kind of have a universal language of how they accept a digital identity. And then that point, you can gradually start layering in various forms of digital IDs that can be interoperable and universally acceptable. So much of our work hasn't really been on the consumer side. It's actually a lot more about working with businesses to create a processor layer with the hope that long term there's an opportunity such as consumers, right? Like everyone's speaking the same language now around identity. Another analogy I oftentimes make is it's very similar to the Visa MasterCard network, in which if it weren't for Visa or MasterCard, we'd still be, either paying in cash or doing something in which like every single company's issuing their own payment credentials, right? That payment method is only accepted within that single entity. But because we have a network payment system, risk is lower, friction is less, everything's a little bit better because our payment ecosystem has made it such that we have some sort of transferable risk.
How do you like the value of a Visa or MasterCard is very clear. Like the merchant gets a purchase they might not otherwise have gone because that person doesn't have money today, and a bunch of other things that it kind of just facilitates, lower friction, whatever. What's the original value prop? Like once the network is there and whatever, just today it's just so much easier. Everybody, you start selling something, you're obviously going to accept Visa, MasterCard, right? But even in the beginning, it was still useful to be able to accept any form of payment. What is that kind of wedge value prop for you at the beginning? Like why does any business decide to work with you and spend the time building out that protocol?
Also, you hit the nail on the head, right? Like it's the exact same fundamental value prop, which is greater access, less friction, or less fraud, making sure that one of those three is always true for any of our customers. So whether that be we have broader coverage, we're able to process an identity faster than somebody else, or with lower friction with a better user experience, or we're able to deter more fraud on behalf of the end customer, and ideally all three all at once for our customers. So that was a lot of the early value proposition, which is how can we build a system that would enable that for our customers? At the time when we had first started, a lot of that evolution was happening in the world of government IDs and biometrics. So already there were a lot of services out there in which you had to upload a government ID. When you upload government ID, what ended up happening in those sort of situations for a lot of the status quo at that time was you'd have folks overseas like manually looking at these IDs. And this could take anywhere from a couple hours to many, many hours, right? Sometimes multiple days even.
What's an example, by the way, of this use case? Like, I mean, the alcohol one could be one alone, like things like that.
Yeah, but I mean, even like, let's say in 2018, like there were all sorts of, new crypto exchanges, there are all sorts of fintech applications, all of whom like if you're like building a new fintech application in which you're onboarding recent immigrants, like they're not going to have social security numbers. They're not going to have access to, a lot of these things. So oftentimes the only way in which they could verify themselves is their government ID. Identity infrastructure, especially from a data perspective, across the world is incredibly still, immature. Sometimes we think that like the government has this massive database. All these governments have massive databases in which they know everybody. It's just not true. Like in reality, actually, these, if you think about these legacy infrastructures are incredibly outdated. One of my favorite kind of like just fun facts about this is that back in the day, like social security numbers weren't random. In fact, like if you're born like I think prior to 1991 or something, your social security number is the first five is identified by the location of which hospital you were born at, and the subsequent 4 is actually just an incrementing number. So like you can actually, if I know how old you are plus like where you were born, I can actually pretty much guess like within like maybe like let's say 100 like within 100 numbers what your social security number is. That's like how insanely like accurate.
Not good security to have at all. Yeah.
Right. Like this is the backbone of all of our identity security at this point, right? So a lot of our work was trying to secure all 3 of these, right? Helping modernize it, make it such that, so from a government ID perspective, our big bet at the early days was, is it possible to make it fully automated? And full automation, first off, meant it's a better experience for the end user. It's faster, right? You're not waiting days anymore. You're waiting a couple of minutes. Or actually for us, it was a couple of seconds. I think even our first iteration was, 20 something seconds for processing. And then 2, we had a big bet that technology will continue to improve such that, and also that fraud would continue to improve, in which humans would probably be outperformed by algorithms, right? Already for so many forms of computer vision based stuff, computers were starting to outperform human review. So we're like, this is probably likely, right? And the third is, if we can make this experience better for everybody, it means that every single company have broader access to more end users. So that was our first wedge. And then after that, we continue to expand because we knew that government IDs, like, you can't just say, oh, image-based processing would be the end all be all. There's a lot of other use cases out there. So we started platformizing pretty much from the earliest days. Again, I think that was an unorthodox decision for us. A lot of times, I think the general advice for startups is like, pick a niche and then win your niche and then expand from there. But we went very aggressively in terms of like not actually like just purely capitalizing on our niche and actually kind of going a little bit wider, because we thought the core of identity isn't solved by like, again, that silver bullet, that single solution, but rather pulling in at more and more data points. So we work towards passive signals, like behavioral signals, a behavioral signals being ones in which, while you're kind of like going through a flow, making sure that you're not a bot, making sure that, your behavior isn't like automate things like that. Looking at network risk, looking into a lot of like hidden risk signals, then pulling in more data source and just continually padding it out, because our goal was never to automate government ID or biometric verifications, right? Not making it, our goal is always, how do we solve identities? And by keeping that as kind of like the North Star, we never really got overly attached to any specific technology, and instead always focused on the problem.
So we'll dive into kind of where you took it and maybe some of the first customers, but just going back in the story. So maybe just first question, like you're working at Square, like you said, you joined when there were a few billion. I mean, it was a pretty solid growth story. How do you tell yourself, walk me through that, right? Like the thinking, it's one thing to talk about starting a startup. It's another thing to actually like leave the thing that's really working well and take the big risk. What was that decision-making process like? And at what point did you feel comfortable that, yeah, okay, you know what, let's leave this thing and let's do this, high risk, high reward journey?
Well, the first is, the joy of being a bit younger is I didn't have too much responsibilities in life, which helps a lot. I think the biggest thing that actually made it feel okay was that we had zero assumption of success. I mean, when I had left, I even had messaged my old manager that I'd probably be back in a couple of months.
He's still waiting.
No, I mean, he messaged me a little later, and I'm like, I think I'm actually stuck on this for a little longer. But at that time, I mean, my expectations were unbelievably low. Like, I don't think I had almost any expectation that this would really go
Why is that? Like, that's the opposite of what most founders are like, this is the thing, this is the $1 billion thing. Otherwise, why would I do it? And if I don't believe it, nobody else will. Do you know what I mean? Like, what drove you thinking about it so differently?
Well, I guess, the cheeky answer here is because I saw the statistics. It's like, to me, I used to joke with people. It's like folks who are like good, believe that they have a preternatural ability to guess the Powerball numbers. Like, I guess maybe, but it's unlikely that you have like some like hidden insight that And honestly, when I reflect on so much of our journey, it was a lot of luck. Like, that's not to say, I would say it's 80% luck, 20% input, right? Like, it's so much luck that just went right. And it's not just luck from like we stumbled on the right idea, the right timing. People who like ended up just in the right situations, the right time of their life, who joined us. Like, we would never be here without so many of the early team. And even like the team today, all of those folks at that time like took a huge risk. And the only reason why they could take that risk was because we were lucky to have met them earlier in our life. And they were also at like this interesting juncture in their life in which they were open to taking these risks too. So a lot of luck, but I think like going in with this assumption that we were pretty much almost certainly going to die, and this was just more or less a sabbatical, uh, helped reduce the stress a lot. And I think a lot of times for early stage startups, the stress and this pressure of needing to succeed almost like is self, it's like self-defeating. Like it will actually destroy you just because you have so much pressure on yourself. I've seen so many startups now, these days, get the opportunity to sometimes help out with some of these earlier founders going through similar stages. And how often I see like them almost like beat themselves is incredible. Like I think actually the hardest stage, like if you're talking from like the 0 to 1 phase, the hardest stage is not so much like, something external, like finding your first customers or all of that. I actually think the biggest enemy you have is really yourself, and like figuring out how to deal with like, the expectations, the stress, and making sure that you're able to continue to press forward, even though there's no defined roadmap, there's no expectations of what's to come. So
It's funny that you say that. Like the thing that comes to mind, maybe a little morbid, but I remember, all the war documentaries that we all that we all watch at some point, and like I just remember this line, and I don't remember the exact quote, but being like, the ones who survived were the ones that went to war thinking like they were already dead. And there was just something about that, like, just it made you, I don't know exactly what it is, but it just puts you in a state of mind that actually, and it's obviously not perfect by any means, but made you like, at least what he was saying was it made you almost more likely to survive and to ultimately make it, but you had to truly believe it. And this sounds like something like that, which is the opposite of what like most founders would say. Yeah, I know that only 1% of startups become unicorns, but like I'm the 1%. Do you know what I mean? Like otherwise, why would I do it? And it's a different way to think about it.
I mean, I think it's funny that, right? Because by default, like if you want to be that 1%, you have to think about something differently. But I think it's funny when 99, as you were kind of like rightfully calling out, 99% of founders end up thinking exactly what the other 99% are thinking. So there's like by default no differentiation in like the thought process. It's like you may be falling into a pitfall immediately. So yeah, I think that definitely helped a lot. I mean, the second thing that helped a lot though was also my co-founder. I mean, he was the one who, from a timing perspective, it wasn't for him. I'm not the type to like jump. Like he's the one I oftentimes credit to actually being the entire impetus of why the startup exists at all, because I would have never jumped. Like I think he would have done a startup almost certainly no matter what, whether with me or otherwise. He would have done one for sure. I probably would not have if it's not for him.
And when you do decide to kind of take that leap of faith, and you're like, whatever, I'll probably be back, worst case, which is actually true. Like the risk you take if you're like a branded company, especially on engineering, and especially back then. Nowadays, maybe there's some more risk, but like it's kind of like worst case, it's a year or two sabbatical, and you come back. What's kind of your first move? Like, do you go out and fundraise? You start building? Do you start selling? Like, where's your head at?
So back then, had no idea what I was doing. I mean, like, if you're too engineered, you just start building. Like, it's the only thing you know. I don't know anything about fundraising. I don't even know like who investors are. Like half these names, I wasn't someone who was very deep in the startup ecosystem. So, half these like the names, which is always like some combination of, I don't know, a tree or, whatever, right? It's always something. So we start building actually as our first kind of thing. Trying to just demo to friends, try to like reach out to friends as startups to like just try to use us. A lot of our early milestones, like we kind of had the perspective of it's gonna just die in 6 months. So this is like a fun little excursion for us, and like we had a lot of really early goals that were just like really easy. It was like, can we get one customer? Can we get one person to use it? Could someone pay us like more than $50 throughout the entire lifetime of our, like we didn't like $1 million seemed unreachable, right? Everyone's always talking about like an ARR. We're like, I don't know. We were like reading like various things online, and it was like your first $1 million. I was like, holy crud, $1 million? Yeah, let's start with, a couple. Like if I can get $2, I'd be pretty happy, right? Like, will anyone even pay us? So our earliest
that alone is worth almost pointing out, like, because it ties into what you were saying. Like, what does the mindset lead to? And I think if you're the top 1%, then you better be doing $1 million real soon, and you better be getting to 10 like right after that. Otherwise, you're a waste of time. Like it's just not worth it. Whereas if you start with how you started, all of a sudden you're like, I guess let's just do this little thing, and hopefully one thing ends up leading to another, as it did in your case. But at the very least, you get those wins, and the milestones are like realistic.
And I think the other portion for us too was that the reality of the kind of startup. I oftentimes tell folks there are a couple people in the world, a very, very small handful, who can will companies into existence. I'm self-aware enough to know I am not one such person, but they exist and they're incredible, but I'm
You're
not
talking like
such
a Jobs, a Musk, like these kind of people.
yeah, right. Well, like these repeat founders, multiple billions, every single time will be a hit, right? Like, it's an astonishing ability that they have. But again, like that's not 1%. That's like a 0.0000, like percent. Most of us end up becoming, a combination of luck and right timing and right mentality. I think a lot of, again, like the earliest risk is the aspect of like self-defeating, like doing something in which you self-destruct. But as long as you can avoid that, then it's just really kind of a probability game of, did you get lucky? Did you pick the right idea? The markets line up, and then continue to kind of progress from there. So
Do you remember specifically your first use case and your first customer?
I do. Yeah, actually very, very well. It was an e-commerce site. Actually, it was a friend of a friend's e-commerce site. And they needed to do, age verification. The only thing we were willing to really focus on was we will do anything around identity. It wasn't even like our later kind of like breakthrough product. That one, I think they were paying us $50 a year, something like that. All right. And we were so happy. I mean, like we were so stoked that anyone was going to use anything that we built.
You love this show. You don't want to miss the next episode. Why would you? So hit that follow button. Trust me, it's in your own best interest.
And that was literally just like upload an ID, check that you said age verification?
Yeah. So exactly, like upload an ID, make sure that you're above 21 to buy this online, right? And that was about it.
And the difference was before, like the solutions then used like in 2018, it was humans that would do that.
Yeah, it was the humans. So you had to create an account. You then have to like register the account, verify it, and that was a lot of our early work. So they'd have to like keep track of all these various accounts on their system and make sure, they weren't doing that much deal. So a lot of it was actually done, I think, in some sort of like spreadsheet, and they would just email and ask people to email stuff over. So we like built some technology that'll make that a little easier.
So that works. Where do you go from there?
Then you try to get the next one. And the next customer didn't have any similar requirements whatsoever. So a lot of our early work was almost like operating like a software consultancy, frankly, right? And a lot of our challenges was, our theory at that time was we will kind of almost build anything as long as it fell within the realm of identity. And, again, physical identity, there's a lot of forms of identity. So we did get a lot of folks who were always like, oh, could you build our authentication system? And we'd be like, no, that's not really what we do, right? We knew like the long-term goal. And I think it's really important to us at that time, like not to deviate too much away from that. It was like, look, we have a vision of what needs to be done. If we start just getting like distracted by anything, then, like we're just doing detours. There's no even like credible way in which we would say this gets back to our original vision. So that was the only really requirement. The second thing was really on the execution side. Anything that we built had to be somewhat generalizable. So much of our work would be like, we get one customer, afterwards we'll keep refactoring until we felt as if there was a kernel there that wasn't like overly specific for just that one use case. And then we'd like go back to the drawing board and go back into this like iteration cycle. And I think that was one thing that also is rather unique for us, was this idea of like explicit versioning. We're not like a waterfall development type of company where, in the agile way of like continuous deployments every single day, constantly releasing. But we definitely had a perspective of like still like versioning matters, and versioning matters because the iterative step doesn't necessarily mean that you'll go through like intense generalizations. As engineers, a lot of times there's this like question of like, when do you refactor? And I actually think refactoring fundamentally is a product driven question, not just a like tech debt type question, right? I think like this quote unquote like tech debt thing sometimes is overly, how do I put it? It's I think like overly abstract of a concept. Really, like you need to refactor when it feels as if the product requirements are starting to detangle more and more from your original intent of your architecture. So we refactored very frequently. Almost after every single our first 10 customers, we would almost rewrite things from the ground up to make sure that like it didn't feel overly specific for that one use case. So like, age is an interesting case, but we're like, they can't just work for age, right? Like otherwise it's a very, very kind of like limited product. We need to start rethinking kind of like, does this overall abstraction, does this setup make sense for the identity, not just for like, one use case? And right off the second.
I'm no engineer, but just to clarify, like what you're saying is because you kind of have like, let's say that one customer, right? They come to you for age. I mean, your choice is either you build something hyper specific for them, which is fast and relatively easy to build, or you build something super generalizable, takes a long time, but then in theory you could, reuse it or whatever. Or you have this kind of hybrid approach, if I'm getting it right, which is you build a specific thing and then you kind of figure it out after and you pull out the pieces that could be generalizable, and you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Exactly. Right. But it's like right after we got that, it's really tempting to go for a second customer and be like, hey, let's just like sell this and start making even more money. We were pretty aware that $50 is like not enough to pay us.
It's not gonna
right?
get there,
It's
yeah.
not a salary, right? We're never gonna be able to live off that. So it was kind of nice. It's a blessing in disguise in which there was no path in which after that we were like, yeah, this is gonna like build a business, right? But instead we felt as if we learned a lot about like the considerations of the problem. And we could go back and like we took, I think like after our first customer, we kind of stopped like talking to anyone for almost a month while we were like rewriting things. And then after that, we did the exact same thing, which was find anyone who would use us in any way, shape, or form. And the second one was a startup, which theirs was more of a kind of like a trust and safety type use case. They want to make sure that folks on the platform were kind of like trusted and verified, and who they say they are, right, type of thing. So once we did that, like that was a very, very different thing. But a lot of our
So that's
generalizations.
what. But is that not the same thing like checking in a government ID, or what did you have to do to?
So actually, that one was at that point, I think we had to do a lot more. Like the government ID ones only, like that's when we actually had to introduce some things around like biometrics, right? Because like a government ID, just because you have one, I could, take my friends, I could do anything. So we started building that. We had to start now linking these two solutions together, right? And that became a whole thing. And like it just gradually evolved from there.
This was like taking a selfie, like this kind of biometric.
Yeah,
piece?
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like taking a selfie of yourself and then be like, okay, is this the same photos, same person?
Where was the broader tech there? Because like, I mean, today we take this for granted, but like where in 2018, when you're starting this, was that was all there? You just had to use it for this use case, or did you have to actually like build something new?
So there was some tech there already. I mean, biometric technologies, like especially like facial recognition type stuff, had been around like even since the early 2010s, especially from like a pure software deployment perspective. There was quite a bit that we had to improve on at that time because the tech was pretty rough, and especially like deployed to like mobile devices. But again, like Face ID had already existed, right? We couldn't use Face ID, but nonetheless, just calling out that there was already a lot of like kind of like groundwork, but improving it and deploying it, and then a lot of improvements. That was a lot of work. We never really focused too much on like, oh, how can we grow faster? And a lot more was like, how do we keep on working with bigger and different use cases to prove out, are we building the right thing? And we kept a lot of focus on that because even the earliest days, we knew that this was kind of if you're trying to build like something venture scale, there's really two ways at it. One of which is you bet on an idea and it turns out the idea is like way bigger than you could have ever imagined. Or two, I think ours was a little more intentional, in which like if we wanted it to be large, like we have to prove that it's large. And that meant like continually finding different types of opportunities, different types of use cases in which it can emerge into. So, I mean, I know once we hired our first go-to-market / like, I guess at that time we call him a growth lead, but he effectively was like a jack of all trades, did everything from like sales, marketing, post, he did it all, right? So truly like was a growth person. I think I was a bit psychotic then, but I had this whole belief at that time. I had like taken this to like dogma at this point, which was if once we close one customer of a certain industry, no more customers of that use case or industry. Like we're not even like going to talk to anymore unless it was inbound. Like, yeah, and like we were going to keep on looking for like alternative stuff because like I think there was this belief, again, a bit psychotic at the time. I was also under this belief that we might as well like find our fastest path to prove that this won't work, as opposed to like wasting our time and being like delusional. The thing I had a lot of friends who had done various startups, and the thing I absolutely did not want to be stuck in is like working on something for 5 years and then like waking up one day and realizing, I'm not into it, or like this isn't going to work. That just felt terrible. And I think a lot of founders, I have seen this a lot, in which I think a lot of founders have a tendency to self-delude into believing like, oh, as long as they just like keep on, doing it, it'll work out. But while they think that, they also aren't actively trying to prove that it's going to fail. Like, they're not really trying to seek out truth. They're really just trying to like almost delude themselves in like this, like, this nice belief and then continue.
I mean, I love that because what happens, at least from my perspective of it, is most founders go into it with that same attitude. I don't want to waste a bunch of time. I'm going to be objective and I'm going to like find something that's truly worth solving. And then at some point in that phase, they find something that may be the thing. And then it flips. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, this may be the thing. They get enough signals. This is the thing. And now it's like, let's make this work. And once you're in that, like, let's make this work mindset, you're no longer truth seeking and objective and being like, oh, maybe this isn't the thing. You're like, this is the thing. And now I got blinders on purpose and I got to make this thing work. But if you make that leap too early, then that's when you wake up 5 years from now and you're doing like $500,000 $1 million, 1.5 million ARR, but barely growing. And all of a sudden, you're like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Like this thing's got nowhere to go, but it's because you shifted away from that original mindset a little too early. It sounds like you were purposefully trying to stay in that open mindset for as long as humanly possible until it was just like, you've proven so many things out,
Yeah, I mean, a common question I actually get a lot is like, have we found product market fit? Or when did you feel as if you found product market fit? And I'll be honest with you, I still don't feel it. I like that mentality of like, oh, like something will happen, or like we still have to figure out the next big thing, or continuing. Like, I mean, I guess that's a trick of the venture game, right? Which is at any point that you think you've made it, and like you'll briefly feel as if you like overcome some hurdle, and then very quickly, either you're bored, or just the news will show with you all these other companies are doing infinitely better, and you're like, okay, like
yes,
like I always
yes.
joke with people, it's like we're both so big and wildly small. Like it's like we're both like fairly successful and unbelievably unaccomplished, and both can be true all at once. So in a very strange way, I guess I still don't feel it. Like that sense of like we still need to find out when this like whole journey is, like this whole illusion will like fade. I still feel that a little bit, in which I'm like, oh, we got to keep pushing ourselves and finding that next thing.
But I mean, humility aside, like there's a question of how big this could get for sure. Like, and there's always another level after this level. But you're obviously generating real value for a lot of real businesses at this point, something that, a year in or 2 years in, you don't really sometimes know, like, am I solving a top pain point for enough people? I think that, I mean, we can say you're past that today.
There's definitely a bit of that, but I will say like the only point I really felt like as a truly major jump on the product market fit question is when I got one customer at 50. Like that actually felt like meaningfully different.
No
After
way.
that, I wouldn't say like it's like changed dramatically. I mean, obviously it's like, oh, we're working with like larger customers every now and then. I'm like, wow, like that's incredible, opportunity for us. I can't believe we're supporting this. But it feels like, an expansion and continued growth of like the original thing, which is we solve someone's problem and we're continuing to find like ways to solve other people's, and hopefully with the same core kind of like platform and making it a little bit easier and smoother to continually solve more people's problems. But I think like the root of it has continued to remain the same.
Walk me through, because now I get kind of the product and go to market history. Maybe walk me through a couple of things. Like first of all, you start just the two co-founders. You mentioned bringing that third. I don't know if it was a third person. Like how do you structure your team like over those 2 years, right? Like how many people are you as you navigate those first use cases?
Oh, I wouldn't take my advice on this for anything, right? There was no intention or thought behind this whatsoever. A lot of the early team were just folks that we thought were good, high potential, and people we knew. And like, again, that's why I say it's so much luck. Like it was either a referral from somebody or like a personal friend. I mean, the first person who joined us, still here, unbelievable, like leads so much of our strategic initiatives right now. He's someone I've known since middle or high school. I met him in high school, right? Like we'd actually like not spoken for a couple of years, but we just randomly caught up, and he's like wanted to do a startup. And I'm like, oh, hey,
And when did you add him? Like how long into your journey?
3-4 months. 3 months
Okay.
in, 3-4 months in, right? Yeah, and I mean, he was living in Seattle at that time and flew on down. Like, he was living on our couch for a brief bit. So I think like for that first like 6-7 months, I mean, I think for the first 7 months, everyone was working out of our apartment. The next person who joined us was an engineer and close friend who I'd worked with over at Square as well. And he, was already considering leaving, wanted to do a startup, still here too. And he's incredible. And he kind of was just like, yeah, sure, Next person was the sister and a referral from someone I'd worked very, very closely with at Square. And then after that, a co-founder, like all of us, like just brought in folks that we knew who were like high potential, high caliber, and like folks that honestly we just wanted to work with again. There wasn't really some like intent behind it. I mean, for the longest of times, it really was just like one, the best part about a startup is there's an infinite amount of work to be done. There's like no, like, oh, you have to worry about like stepping on anyone's toes. It's just like if you like, we just have a bunch of stuff to do. Just grab something off, like anything, and go off and do it. And as long as like they were willing to like kind of do anything, and we're always thinking about like, oh, how does it plan my career otherwise? One thing that we were really intentional about telling everyone too is like, if you're joining this, like just think of it as like a 6 months, 1 year kind of sabbatical. Almost certainly we'll die. There's not really a point to this, right? Like hopefully we'll have some fun. We'll learn some random things. But
So you instilled that mentality in everybody else. You didn't give them like kind of that warmth and confidence of, this is a $1 billion company.
that this is
like,
gonna be the
blah,
best thing ever. No, are you kidding me? No, not at all. I think that's like wildly disingenuous. No, I mean, I think this went on again, like even up until we were like 100 people. I was like, look, like if you're joining us, it's probably a waste of your time and a terrible choice in your career, but you may like it, right? And I think people used to call that like the Rick anti-sell or something.
Yeah, right. Why did people join then? What do you think they saw that they liked? Especially the early ones, like the first 10 employees, just to make it up.
I think part of it's the journey, but the other part is like a lot of like it's the same reason I think that I ended up like doing this with Charles, which is above all else, I just want to work out with Charles on something. Like Charles, I think had like the perspective like I want to go and do a company one day, right? Preferably with you, but like he was definitely very interested in doing a startup and exploring that world, and I want to work with him. And for a lot of like the team, I mean, even today, like Persona is 70% referrals. We're like 400 folks, but like 70% is like someone who needs somebody else, right? And I think that core idea of like wanting to work with people is above all else, I think the only thing that really differentiates companies from each other. If you're going to tell folks like, oh, like this is like this, there's always an opportunity cost to this type of thing. If you're going to tell them this company is the most impactful thing in the world, there's just no way, right? I mean, right now, there's, AI, but I even joke with people as big as AI will get, maybe it'll solve global warming and cancer and whatever, but like you could also work on those specific things. And I suppose that's a bigger impact, right? Half the companies out there are really just doing some software layer on top of something else. Like you can delude yourself into saying this is the most impactful thing you can spend your entire life on. But again, I think like if you just like think for a little bit, that's probably not true, right? I think the only thing that really brings people together is wanting to, the only thing in my mind that really differentiates any startup from another is the culture and frankly, the people that you want to kind of be around and just work around, right? I think if you're going to do a startup, like I think one of the worst mentalities to have is what I often call like a min-max mentality in which like everything has to be the most optimal choice. Startups by default is a wildly unoptimal choice and like a life career decision, right? Sure, you can go and like listen to all sorts of random content out there and I'm sure they'll tell you like, oh, here's the secret or whatever, financial podcast or whatever. But the reality of it is like, no, it's like really just kind of a journey and exploration. It's a personal decision at the end of the day.
I like everything you're saying, and I'm trying to put myself in the mind of a founder that is early stage, 0 to 1, whatever, and they need to hire an engineer. Like they need to actually recruit someone for an engineering role. And the go-to thing is I can't pay as much, so I'll sell the dream, sell the impact, sell the options. Do you know what I mean? Like hype something up to get people to quit their job at Square or their job wherever. Again, it sounds like you didn't do that, but I guess the question is then maybe it's just you have to have that network. You have to have those referrals in the first place, or what's the alternative to make people ultimately, want to join you when you need them? Also, that's the other thing is like, I need an engineer in the next 3 months. Well, I need them now. I got to go do something about it.
Well, so I mean, you hear every one of these stories. So first off, I'll say something that might be a little, I don't know, unpopular, a little uncomfortable, which is if you're just out trying to hire like some random engineer or technical person that you have zero experience with or otherwise, I've seen some of the statistics around this. Your probability of like failure is like not just like 2x higher, it's like 100+ x higher. Like your probability of success right off the bat is effectively zero. If you are in that sort of situation, my advice, and I have some folks on this, and again, I'll say it, it's may or may not be popular, but I think it's my
That's fine. Be candid.
Opinion,
yeah.
Right. Is you're better off joining a company and like meeting some people and doing a really, really good job. Like the reason, so many folks here at Persona are folks I previously worked with. Like, I mean, 50+ people here I've known like and worked directly with at some point in my career. I like to say like, I think like folks who always have like a plan of like, trying to figure out how they'll eventually do a startup, they always are kind of like angling for something. I don't know. It's kind of hard to like be a great coworker in that sort of stance, right? I think the most ideal one is you've worked with this person before. They're great. They like working with you. You understand each other's working styles. And the best place to find that is doing a really good job at another place. And while you're there, you're also going to see, at least some operating norms, some things that will help you out, right? Joining another kind of company. I think like people who are like, oh, I'm just not a company person. I'm more of a startup person. I'm a founder type, like right out of the gate. I don't think that's like, I think again, it's like, that's difficult. The only other type in which I see like success out of this is usually it's like classmates or something like that, right? In which like, again, they've worked together at school or something, or they're like friends, but it almost always like you're probably a success, at least working, maybe not with a friend, but someone you've worked with before or know is so much better. So my general perspective is like, if you're out trying to like just hire a technical co-founder or otherwise, consider like working for a couple of years. Honestly, it probably would actually save a lot of time, because like that way you can find someone that you really like working with, bring them along on the journey with you. Right. And like you've already de-risked so much, as opposed to spend 1 to 2 year like kind of like cycling around, try to figure things out. Right. And like at the same time having to learn completely independently.
I think it's totally legit, and I think like a lot of the founding, the entrepreneurship thing is really romanticized, and you over focus on, like, you look at Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or whatever, like some of these founders that Mark, like, started freshman sort of thing, like right out of college, had no network, and look at what they built. But they're not that 1%. They are true like Six Sigma events, and and also they had a company that, this is the other thing, is like, if you have a company that's absolutely blowing up, everybody's going to want to join you, including people that you don't know. But most companies, even the ones that do really well, aren't blowing up at that level. And so if you don't have a network, going out to like, be in the real world for a few years is probably not a bad idea, and a great idea to increase your odds if you ultimately do get a good idea that you want to run with and start on your own.
I'll also say this, for everyone you just said, I mean, let's go with the founding stories, right? Microsoft, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, right? High school friends, very, very close friends for a very long time, had done actually work together in high, they're both prodigies, but like, Paul, a bit older than Bill, knew each other very well through all of high school. They'd worked on all sorts of projects, right? What was it? I forgot the exact founding story, but right, like
they did. But I mean, like, in terms of the first 30 hires that they made, like, they probably didn't know most of them. Will be my guess. Actually, I don't know that for a fact.
Using at least I can say for the Apple one, right? Like Woz and Steve,
yeah, that's
worked
true.
on Atari together, right? And not to mention they originally met through the computer club, and a bunch of the early hires, computer club people. I actually knew one of the first 10 hires, because he was a at Square incredible guy, and I think like he got introduced to the company through, I think, his parents, who knew like Jobs' parents. So
right.
again,
yeah,
like,
even that's
like
referral based. Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, yeah, that's a good point.
You're right. Google. 2 people were PhD students together. You go through Facebook, technically for, like college students. I know social network portrays that. But again, like the first early journey was all that. Like, and a lot of the early hires were all Harvard/Stanford kind of students that they knew. It's very, very hard. Like everyone always says, like you need to cultivate your network. But if you look through all the networks that are formed, it's very rarely like through networking events or otherwise. It's through some like alternative, deeper relationship that they build, that like forges something that's like beyond just like a pure business transaction. So whether that be school, whether that be working together. I mean, I oftentimes tell folks, if there were one thing I credit to, the best thing that made Personas like increase the Persona success, it was how long I was at Square. And I'd like to say, I was dedicated and like did a fairly decent job, but I think like above all else, that actually increased the probability of our success more than anything else by like orders of magnitude.
Another thing I want to touch on, because we didn't touch on it yet, is the fundraising history. So you started off, you didn't know anything about fundraising. You said you just started building. When did you look at fundraising as something that you needed to do and kind of start exploring that side of it, or how did that happen?
I mean, it was again, like actually I got pulled into it because friends that I know, like my old boss, Jackie Reese's, right? She was the one who like, put in a huge, like unbelievably kind word. The person actually who pulled me out to the Valley, who got me, like kind of like hired me for my first internship as part of the Kleiner Perkins Fellows program way back in the day. He like reached out and was like, hey, like, do you want fun? Like, think about fundraising, all of that. Like a bunch of people actually just reached out, and like many of them I'd either interacted with at some point in my career, or, like while at Square, they were like, oh, let me help like support you in any which way. My old manager, when I left Square, I was far too shy to speak with Jack. I suppose I still am. Jack Dorsey's still like, this, I don't know, like sagacity
mythical figure,
right?
yeah.
Mythical man,
That's
right? And like he's another guy who can like will like things into existence. I mean, incredible business, right? The guy truly has a very, very incredible ability to have a vision. But I was far too like shy to like find time with him. But my old manager like set up, and like when I left, he was like, hey, he was a very, very early Square employee, and he's like, I set up like an hour for you to like just pepper Jack with questions and like talk and just all sorts of things like that, right? And I think that was all
like?
because, I mean, honestly, in retrospect, embarrassing and cringy, right? I like was so nervous for it, so I think I wrote down like 100 questions, and all the questions was just the worst, right? Like, and I like was like peppering. I felt like some sort of awful, beatnik journalist just asking him like all these things. And, like now that I think back on some of those questions I asked, like I wouldn't even know how to respond to them. Right. So like the questions are too general and like not at all, like to the question of like when to start thinking about fundraising as an example, I asked them the same thing, but the quick answer, all I can give you is it depends on the business you're running and who you are, which is what he told me. And like at that time, I was like, oh, what an unsatisfying
it depends.
answer.
It
But then I look
depends.
back, I was
Yeah,
like,
fuck.
I don't know, right? Like,
Totally.
that really was the only way you could say it, right? But like that question's not by any means bad, but I had worse ones too, right? Like it was just all sorts of like random stuff. I asked him about like how to think about. Oh my gosh, and all the answers are really, it just depends, right? But but he like was so gracious with his time, and then at the very end, he asked a little bit about what we were doing, and imparted some like piece of wisdom, and it was nice. It was really nice. I'm very, very grateful to Jack for the time. I'm ever more grateful to my old manager, Ted Mao, who I still think is an incredible person. Who
So what was your first round, and like when was it, in like how long after you left?
I think 4 or 5 months. I can't exactly remember.
Sure, more or less.
It almost pretty much completely manifested from like various folks kind of like talking about us and making introductions on my behalf to various people. Gosh, I get always emotional thinking about it because like so many of those introductions I didn't even ask for. They were just like, you need help, let me help you out. Right? Like you should talk to this person. Our first round was with First Round Capital, who it continues to be absolutely incredible. Kleiner and Kotu also participated. All of the folks there were either introduced to me by someone in my life or because, like there was some involvement, right? Part of the Kleiner Fellows program, all of that, like everything kind of like culminated.
How big was it around?
It was about 2 point something million, like 2.4 something million. Yeah. It was at that time it was decent. Yeah. I mean, at that again,
yeah,
like,
for sure.
we couldn't believe
Absolutely.
it, right? we're like, gosh, like I don't even know if we'll make revenue greater. That's right. Like that's an incredible number.
Well,
We
that
did
was
have a
what I
debt,
actually
yeah.
wanted to. That's what I wanted to talk about. Is like, okay, so it comes inbound. You don't have to do that much work to get it. Great, you have the money, but does that change your mindset at all? Does it add the pressure that you're kind of so much trying to not really have like upon you, because all of a sudden they do need to get a return? Like it isn't really. I mean, a lot of their stuff will fail and they know that, but like they're not in it for you to come back in 6 months and be like, hey, it didn't work. Like sorry, like that's not ideal.
So we definitely added a ton of pressure initially when we fundraised. And actually, I think my co-founder, our first hire, like there was one really late evening. I remember they both like effectively had an intervention with me. It was like, you got to chill, and I think, and it helped a lot because it helped like restore this level of sanity of, like, what are we really trying to do this? And it's a journey. Like at the end of the day, the only thing they can ask for on us is we tried our best. And, I think we had a lot of fear that we would be disappointing a bunch of people. I think we had a rule that we did not take any funds from any friends or family because we just didn't want that additional pressure of any way, shape, or form. I didn't want to like look at someone who I knew in my personal life and be like, oh, I lost your money.
That's smart.
So we didn't do any of that, which helped a bit. And then, beyond that, I was like, hey, they believe in us. So like the only thing we can really do is try our absolute best.
But they were aligned high level with your approach versus like trying to get to 1 million or 10 million or whatever as fast as possible in that stage. They were aligned with your kind of idea of just testing
and actually,
cases.
a lot of folks had shared this too, which is actually one of the best. I can't remember who gave me this advice, but it was one of the best I ever received, which was like, the faster that your product can get to 1 million, the faster your product is likely easily replicatable.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And I think that also took a ton of pressure off. Like if you think about like some of the, speaking of, incredible companies, actually, Charles was lab mates, and actually I was interns with Dylan Field over at Figma. He's one of our he is one of our angels. I mean, kind of both a friend, but also incredible founder. So kind of sat in a different category. He gave us a ton of advice in the early days. Was super helpful. I remember he hosted us at his office when it was like just the two of us, and we kind of just sat around and like chatted, and we're like, holy crud, Dylan, like
That's
this is
sick.
insane. And he, I think like he was like, oh yeah, but if there's a company I admire tremendously, Figma's an incredible business. I love his story so much because he founded it Figma like right after the time in which the two of us interned together. And that's the story of them to like 1 million is like 7 years. They
Right.
spent
Yeah, it's
so
long.
long on like investing on the technology, making sure the product was great. I think like, and today we all see like this like meteoric rise or whatever. But the investment they made is insane to actually like continually like hone and crystallize the product. Another one that I actually met through first round, who again I feel tremendous gratitude towards. But Clay, I think, is another company which I think like so highly of. Kareem, I think, is an incredible guy. Clay's another one of those businesses in which they took a long time to find the exact product fit. Like they were
I didn't
thoughtful,
actually
they
know
were
that.
intentional.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they were founded, I think, I think Kareem first started exploring startups. Oh gosh, if I'm wrong, Kareem, I'm sorry. I think it was 2015, right? And I remember when we first started, like I met with him, and we've been in touch. Even I think borderline, like actually since the first year of Persona's founding, I've known the guy. Just talking with him and hearing about like a lot of their early journey, I think was humbling, and it was really cool. I think like similar, they had a early round from Sequoia, but then they spent a long time continually trying to crystallize and figure out exactly what they're trying to build. And they didn't really like aim for ARR or growth until they knew they were happy with the product that they really put together. So those are a couple stories in which like I think sometimes people chase way too much towards like how fast can I like, get to something. And one of the best things Kareem ever told me is like, really not taking the journey for granted. Like you did it not for like the result, you did it to enjoy the journey. If you're like putting the pressure on yourself with the sole focus on an outcome, it's like almost self-defeating of a mentality.
And so how long did it take you guys to get to $1 million ARR?
I don't even remember, to be honest. But yeah, I think like maybe a year and a half or something. Yeah, we were relatively fast at it, but there were, we got lucky on a couple things, right? Crypto, fintech both took off. We've had setbacks, with like the decline of that, and then we had to like rethink. But like the strategy never really changed, the product really never changed. But like, we get luck. Like I think some companies get lucky, but it's never like a smooth road for anybody.
Perfect. Well, listen, let's stop there in the last two questions that we always end on. There's three, but the PMF one you already answered. The other two are, was there ever, I guess this is for you, it's already kind of answered, frankly. But the question is like, was there ever a time that you thought you would fail, which you basically said was all the time or at the beginning?
I mean, I still feel it. Yeah, still feel it very, very all the time. So yeah.
And then the last question is, and you mentioned you speak with a lot of founders. What's some of the most common early stage advice you find yourself giving?
It's this like hyper optimization, I think, like is the greatest failure for.
What do you mean by that?
As in like something I really believe in, and I tell a lot of folks here at Persona is, this, like, I think that people can be crippled. Every single company from from Valley's perspective always has something similar, which is like moving fast, like disagree and commit. Something about like, how do you just like make decisions at a higher pace? I think there's this underlying idea behind it, which is that it's actually unlikely thinking a long time about a decision will actually dramatically improve outcomes, especially for like very difficult, uncertain decisions. Actually, like making a decision and then quickly reverting or like just learning from it is way more important than like the quality of decision. So I think an implicit thing is actually pace of decision making matters more than quality of decision making. One thing I really believe in, and this is actually both from Reflections at Square and Persona, was that what was terrifying for me wasn't even that, we couldn't sometimes tell which decision was right or wrong. We couldn't even tell which decisions mattered. Like there were situations in which I think some of the most impactful decisions for Persona were things that we kind of just offhand did and didn't even think twice about it. We didn't think it was an important idea. And like later on, it was like, holy crap, this is actually really pivotal. And there's other things in which, we thought, oh, this is going to be a huge deal, in which it turned out no one cares. And like, I often say it's like terrifying it's humbling, terrifying to realize that not only can you sometimes not predict if you're right or wrong, you can't even tell like the magnitude of a decision. So what this implies is a lot more times, actually, it matters more. Can you just make decisions quickly and like try your best? And like, obviously you can't be wrong all the time, but like if a decision is not immediately obvious, it's better to just disagree and commit or move fast and break things, whatever like, common kind of value, company value you want to follow. And I think a lot of times one of the scariest things, like when you're small, you'll get paralyzed by all these things because again, it's like, oh shoot, like, I'm scared this will destroy us. And the reality is almost none of them will. But like what will kill you is not like moving fast enough. So that's why I kind of say it's like this mentality of like hyper optimization where you're like, oh, but how could this be a little better? Like trying to hyper optimize every single situation is not only a waste of time, I think it's actually really damaging. And a lot of the decisions that really matter, like you may not have optimized it perfectly, but like they're huge, right? And your goal is to find as many of these like impactful decisions as possible, just to like almost like a quantity search, not from let me like get every single decision absolutely perfect. You're going to get just washed away because you're going to miss all the major big decisions.
Perfect. Well, Rick, thanks so much for jumping on the show, man. It's been great to have you.
Likewise. Hey, thanks so much again.
85% of people who listen to the show just started listening to it this year. You're probably one of those people. In fact, the odds are 85%. Guess what? You need to go back because there are over 100 other episodes that you need to check out that are just as good, if not better, than this one. Don't miss out.